You've worked with a lot of different students in the time that you've been here. I was hoping you could talk to some of the specific strategies that you see students use that have been beneficial to them, or again, since you manage mentors who are working with students, talk about strategies that they've told you about that have been really beneficial to their students.
Yeah, I actually just heard one the other day from a mentor, and it was actually not even a mentor suggestion. It was a student suggestion about limiting distractions. And one thing that the student does is he puts his phone on black and white, just goes into his setting, like turns the color off, and then his phone doesn't like attract so much attention, and he is on it and he's like, ew, this is kind of gross, and then puts it away. So I love that the student gave the mentor that suggestion.
I think that's great because a lot of the times I don't have a solution for my students necessarily, but I just keep asking them the question, like, this is the problem we've identified. What do you think would help you? Here's some things you can go try, but what do you think would help you? What do you think would help you? What do you think would help you? And then eventually they show up one day with a solution that works really well for them, and then you can like share that with other people so that other mentors and other students can try that themselves.
Especially with phones and being a distraction.
Yes.
I'm the biggest culprit when it comes to being distracted by a phone. So I love to hear new ways, because we know do not disturb. We know put it in a different room, but like sometimes we don't want to do that. And I tell my students, but I rarely do it myself. But I loved that suggestion because it's something new to try. It's like, okay, you've done do not disturb in the past. You say it doesn't work for you. Let's try this and see if that will help take your screen time down for the day.
Yeah.
Another thing I do is just like moving my apps around. And sometimes I'll open my phone and be like, why am I in this folder? Like, what am I looking for? And it's because I so mindlessly go to certain apps when I'm just on
memory to open it.
Yeah. And it's one of those things that just makes you a little more grounded, and it makes you more intentional with like how you're using your screen time.
And I really like that those are smaller steps that a student or mentor could take, because I think some people react of like, I'm never going to use my phone, or I'm not going to use it for an entire week, or I'm going to delete all of my social media apps. And that works for a little bit, but it's not sustainable, and it's usually not the best choice anyway.
Another thing is the use of AI.
Oh, yeah.
And especially in college, especially with honor systems, it's a big deal, and you can't use it to do your work for you. And that's made very clear by universities and professors.
And it's not beneficial to the student to use it in that way either.
Right. And so what we can use AI for is a lot of other things that I think especially our students who, when they're doing an assignment that takes them twice as long as their peers, or they really struggle with writing, or maybe writing makes them really anxious and makes it even that much harder because of their feelings around it, it can help them get started. It can help them organize their thoughts in a way where it can set them up for success completing the assignment, and like an assignment that they feel proud of. ChatGPT is a great one to help you make study guides, or maybe clarify some concepts that are coming up on your exam that you didn't quite get from the professor or the textbook. So sometimes I ask ChatGPT to explain things to me, like if I was a second grader, because I really need it to be broken down in like very simple language for me to be able to process it. So that's something our students can do, like having information being presented to them in several different ways, and ways that are going to work best for them.
Yeah, especially if my students are already going to use AI. It's not the right fit for everyone, but it can help you with efficiency and pattern recognition, almost like self-reflection. If it's something like making a study guide so then a student can get themselves started studying, that's really efficient. Tools like Notebook LM are really good for that, because you can give it all of your classes readings for that chapter and then ask it questions so it can like teach you that material, help you learn it faster. Pattern recognition is huge. It's almost like what we try and do in self-reflection. A lot of my students, especially my college students, just from being in class, they can't tell what the main topics are or what are the important things that are going to be asked on the exam. But if you can have an AI be like, given the things that I've handed to you, what are the most important things? What is probably going to be on the exam? It can help a student start to recognize the patterns within a class and figure out how to recognize them themselves. You can't just go brain off, right? You have to be using it and trying to learn from it. But some of those tools are really helpful because I'm not sitting in class with them. I can give them tips on how to do it, but I can't do it with that level of accuracy and efficiency.
You mentioned Notebook LM. It's a newish AI tool that is really great for some of our students who have different learning styles. So if you're an auditory learner, you can put all of these readings into Notebook LM and it'll make an AI podcast with all of that material and only drawing from that material. So you can listen to it on a podcast, walk around while you're listening to it, because sometimes for some students, that is how they retain the information. So I love that they give different modes of learning with that material. And it's not something where you just ask it to make a study guide and then you just know it. You still have to actively study with it and engage with it. And so I really like those tools because they can provide extra study material that some professors or teachers don't give to the students.
One specific strategy that I saw, and this was for a 6th through 12th grade mentor, not a college mentor, that I loved the other day, and I think really shows how much our mentors are trying to understand how our students learn best, like you were talking about, and just work off of their strengths. It's a mentor at our sports stable location who knows that their students, 2 of their students are pretty competitive, right? They're like very competitive athletes. And so they've used that to help them develop executive function skills by having them compare how well do they have their planner filled out? How well have they done this homework assignment? So they can use that like natural need to be competitive to be really engaged in a session, in a mentoring session, in doing their homework. And it's been fantastic for them. So that one made my day when I heard it. I thought it was a really nice specific example. Obviously that takes 2 students, but those almost niche strategies that our mentors come up with, they're trying to be creative all the time to figure out what really works best for students, because it's not one size fits all, right? You can't just say like, here's this academic routine, stick to it and you'll be successful. That just doesn't work for everyone. Everyone has different ways of learning the material or keeping themselves motivated or keeping themselves from getting distracted.
And I love that too, because it allows the students to play and have fun with it, which I think works well for everyone. Like if they experience joy while doing something, well, like planning or executive function skills, that's a huge win for them. You mentioned something about how you're not in class with your students. Like we can help them outside of school. They can come into the homework center, get all the support they need. But when they're in class, which is a majority of their day, for students who have a hard time paying attention in class, I think that's something that is really hard for us as mentors to support students with. So one thing that we like to teach our students during sessions is one, how to take notes. And it goes so much further than that too, because there's so many styles to take notes. I think when students hear that, especially our younger students, they might be a little resistant to certain types of notes, like how to organize the information and organize their thoughts. Sometimes we like to encourage them to make that process fun. So is there something funny that your teacher or professor says, or something that they say a lot, and you can like have a little tally of how many times they said in a presentation or whatever it is to help them be more engaged?
Not everything is that serious. We want them to do well, and a lot of the ways that we can get them to do well is by making it not so like strict, stuffy, boring, right? You can be actively engaged and still respectful to your teachers, even if you're doing a tally of like a thing they say all the time, right? So I think sometimes the inclination is they're behind, they have these assignments to catch up on, they need to get their grade up, they need to sit down and work harder. In a way that's true, but that doesn't mean that it has to be miserable, right? Like oftentimes they're already a little bit miserable, or that they're like don't love their class. It's not that they don't want to be succeeding. Just because they're not succeeding or they're having trouble staying engaged or not feeling super bored, especially if you have ADHD, your brain runs off of dopamine, right? So just trying to find ways to like spark that joy in their life, or like get them interested in ways that aren't just trying to make them feel like they have to be working towards this huge future goal. That's usually not helpful, actually. But just making it like fun or silly, or how literally whatever works for the student to keep them engaged. If they're engaged, great, we can go from there.
So when your students show up, maybe they're just having a really bad day, or maybe they're experiencing some burnout, how do you help them re-engage? How do you help them stay motivated during the session and moving forward?
Yeah, in a way I don't. I work with a lot of anxious, depressed young students. It's really important to me that they have the space to feel that way without being forced to be like bubbly or cheery or try and like demonstrate that they're super engaged, because they're not all the time. Especially with anxiety and depression, a lot of times that presents more as a brain fog than anything. So them not responding to me or getting distracted by their phone or kind of mindlessly scrolling on their laptop or whatever they're doing isn't a sign of disrespect. It isn't a sign that they hate me. It isn't a sign that they are like super not into it today. I mean, they might not be into it today, but it often is a sign that they're experiencing some high level of anxiety, or maybe they're not feeling their best that day, right? So I tend to bring my energy down a little bit. Maybe I do the planning for them instead of trying to get them to do the plan. I can't expect my students to show up at 100% every day. And my role is not to motivate them to be at 100%. A lot of my students that I work with now, I've worked with for the entire time that I've been here. They know me well enough, they show up and they tell me what's going on. For newer students, what my role is to help them identify in a way that makes them feel safe. Here's an observation I have about you today. Do you agree with that? Like, I noticed you're a little out of it. How are you like worried about tests? Do you have something going on with your friends? Is it like something at home? First, getting them to identify it, because with a brain fog, right, you're maybe not going to even realize, or like, you feel off, but you don't really move past that thought. So first identify it and then figure out, how do you make accommodations for yourself in the upcoming week? Maybe you had this huge ambition for this week that you wanted to get this like huge project done, and now you're not feeling very good. You don't have to hold yourself to that or build up more anxiety because you're not doing the things that you had said that you needed to do, right? How do you give yourself a little bit more space? How do you give yourself a little bit more rest? So that self-reflection piece is really what I work on with them, instead of trying to like get them back up to speed and feel like super peppy.
When you have a student who just shows up and is having a bad day and you step in and you're providing more support than you usually would, how do you go about making sure that they're still building that independence and not using you as a crutch?
If I have to step in and support my student that week, that shows that I'm there for them more than it is me being a crutch or getting in the way of them being able to build independence. There are days that I will make a plan for them, because even if they've been making it for themselves for a while now, they just can't get themselves to do it that day. What I make sure to do when I'm acting as a support system for them, essentially, is I always walk them through what I'm doing. So they're still part of it, right? It's not that I'm just like, okay, you just sit there and do whatever you want and I'll make the plan and like, here it is, go home. I'm still talking out loud, like, okay, I'm going to check your grades. Like, great, this class went up. Okay, this class went down. It's this test. It's not that they're like completely shut out of it, but if they don't have the energy to do it that week, that's fine. I'm there for them. Eventually, especially if you bring them along in your thought process and you're talking out loud constantly and you're still asking them questions when you need to, even when they're super tired, over it, drained, they will hit the point that they can run those questions in their head for themselves. So even when they're tired, they're still able to plan for themselves eventually. And I think it's almost not more important, but it is an important step towards independence to know how to do that for yourself when you're not feeling good, right? I know we've mentioned motivation a few times. Motivation is fickle, right? You can't 100% rely on motivation. You can't just say like, I can do this as long as I'm feeling good. Because there's times where you're going to feel awful and you have to do something anyway, right? It's great if you can obviously set yourself up to feel better over time. Like, you don't want to be not sleeping all the time and still trying to get things done, right? But knowing how, when you're like low energy, to still get through something is important. There are days that I show up and I don't have a lot of energy. And I'll tell my student like, hey, I'm so sorry, I'm really low energy today. We're still going to plan. I just wanted to give you a heads up. And then they see, how am I still able to show up to work, right? And work with them and still you can be enthusiastic and low energy at the same time, right? It doesn't have to present as like super peppy. It's mostly me being present with them and I'm still listening to them. It's, again, something I always go back to that I have to remind myself a lot, is that everything that we do, we are modeling to students, whether we mean to or not. I had a few realizations when I was working with students of a lot of the things that I was asking my students to do, I was not being a good mentor and model of. So I'm encouraging my students to do things outside of academics and get involved, or like have hobbies, or just kind of have a variety of things going on in their life. And then I wasn't doing that. A lot of my students started volunteering and I wasn't volunteering. So I saw that they were and that they really liked it, and I went out and found a place to volunteer myself. And then it's really nice to come back to your student and say like, hey, I really admire that you did this and you inspired me and it's genuine, and now I'm volunteering as well. And I just wanted to let you know that that made an impact on me, and that's setting them up to go be a model or a mentor or have that kind of a role for their friends or someone in the future as well, because they see like how important that modeling is and how important it is to practice what you preach, basically.
I love that you do that for your students, because so many of the students that come to us have been really insecure about where they're at their whole lives, whether they're just not getting good grades or things just are more of a struggle for them like all the time, and being able to create a positive experience for them and to be like, now I want to be like you. I think that's something that our students don't really experience a lot in their life, especially when it comes to like their responsibilities and activities.
Yeah, something that I know Brandon talks a lot about. Students with ADHD receive 20,000 more negative comments than their peers by the age of like 8 or 10 or whatever it is, right? So constant negative feedback of ways that you're not stacking up to your peers, like whoever's expectation of you, is not a great way to build independence. It's not a great way to build these skills. To a certain extent, it's inevitable, right? They exist in the world and it will happen. But then what are ways that you can build their confidence and show them that they're doing a good job? They're having a positive impact on people. And it's nice for me to be like, hey, this was important to me. Here's how I do it even on days that I'm over it. The volunteering that I picked is outdoors in the wintertime, which is important to me because I will stay inside and get very sad in the wintertime, which again is a lot like a lot of my students. So then I can be like, this is a way that I've added structure into my life so that I have to go do this thing and it makes me feel better even when I don't want to do it. So many of my students, when they're in school in this structured environment, they do great. And then when they're outside of school in these more unstructured environments, things get a little bit harder. So it's another way I can model, how do you build structure into your life? How do you do something consistently? How do you make a choice that's maybe hard up front when I have to get there in the dark, in the snow, when it's like below freezing, but it makes me feel so much better. And especially for those tough asks, I think it's really important that I can have something to talk about myself, about how do I get myself to do it? How do I get myself to do the hard things? And also expressing to them that like you hate it sometimes. I think there's this misconception that you have to love everything you do or feel motivated or feel like super happy all the time. And that's just not true. It's important that they know that what you're looking for is the whole. If you're not doing those things, you feel worse. In the moment, you might feel a little bit worse, but like overall, you feel so much better. And here's how you stay consistent with it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's also the lead domino, right? So when you volunteer in the winter, maybe waking up is not good. You just want to stay in bed. It's cold, you're tired. But once you get over that initial hump, you get to go outside, you get to do something that you find really fulfilling, and then you leave so much better. And it gives you the energy to carry out the rest of your week or your weekend and show up fully. That's what we would call the lead domino. It's like that one thing that you can do that's going to help so many other areas of your life. And pushing over that lead domino is hard. When you think of dominoes, like that takes effort. I mean, they're tiny, but that's the whole thing. It takes effort to push that one, but then you have to trust that the others will fall with it.
Yeah. And I really like that I can talk about seasonally, like either literally seasonally or just, you know, in your life seasonally, how that lead domino changes. I'm very open to my students about how in the wintertime I have to go outside and that's my lead domino. But in the summertime, it's other things, right? It's making sure that I can be focused at work when I just want to be outside and do nothing else, right? Or there's chunks of time where I've stopped exercising and then I have to be like, oh, I'm a little tired today because I started this exercise routine again. Here's how I got myself to do it. So, I mean, a lot of that is in relationship building with students. And I'm really careful that I don't make the session about myself, but there's ways that you can incorporate that and demonstrate to students some of the steps that you're taking to give yourself the conditions to grow in. And sometimes that's directly relevant to the student, and sometimes it's not immediately relevant to the student. Again, everything you're doing has an impact on them. We work with these students really consistently and they look up to us. And so it's important that a lot of what we're expressing are those positive long-term changes that they can make, even if what I'm doing with that student in that session is immediate short-term. We've had this conversation that maybe like plants a seed about thinking more long-term, thinking more big picture.